The views and opinions of the guests of Veterans Archives do not reflect the views and opinions of Veterans Archives, its subsidiaries, or its partners. Hello and welcome to Veterans Archives. This is a podcast where you can learn about our military history in the words and voices of the men and women who lived and created it. I'm your host, Bill Krieger, and let's listen to our next story. Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, December 20th, 2023, and we're talking with Bob Elliott, who served in the Army National Guard. So, Bob, we're going to start out very simple. Let's talk about when and where you were born.
Sure. So way back in the 60s, right? 1965 to be exact, in Peoria, Illinois, in central Illinois, land of Lincoln.
Oh, excellent. So 65 was a good year because that's when I was born as well.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we've got a lot to share, I guess, from that life that life we've lived up to this point.
Absolutely. So could you talk a little bit about what it was like growing up, Bob Elliott? What was it like to be a kid? What are some of your earliest memories?
Yeah, so Peoria is a metropolitan area for that part of the state, so certainly not a Chicago, but over 100,000 folks. So, public school system, private school systems. I went to the local public school system. And as a young kid, one of the things that I recall very vividly is my best buddy next door. And we were in a neighborhood, but we're also alongside somewhat of a wooded area, and we would go and we would play Army. And we'd go down and into the creek and into the tunnels under the train track and use our imagination. I'm talking about age probably 10 and 11, and just have a great time until the parents would yell out time to come back, or it started to get dark. That was our indicator that the day was winding down. And so yeah, those were some fun memories that at the time I had no idea that I would serve in the military, but I think those seeds were planted early.
Oh yeah, and it's funny you say that because I remember as a kid playing Army and having all the really cool toys and all that stuff. So what about brothers and sisters? Any brothers and sisters?
Yeah, so I'm one of six. I've got two brothers and three sisters, so we're rather a large family. Back in that day, it seemed pretty typical in the neighborhood to have friends that had several siblings. And I was the oldest boy. I had one older sister, a couple years older. So in the birth order, I guess I think that was another factor that came into play that led me down a path eventually to military service.
Oh, okay. And so you have any or I don't say good memories, but any memories that come to mind when you think about your brothers and sisters?
Yeah, of course. Again, they were younger for the most part, but again, as I played out Army, we'd play in the back field, just sort of a property, and we'd go out there and play, whether it was tag or all those fun games that we played in those days that didn't require batteries or power. Kick the can, those types of things in the street, throw the football back and forth over the high wire or the power line if we can, and so. Yeah, just having fun going to right along the river there. So our family would go to the Illinois River and fish for entertainment, and that was some good memories as well. So just sort of a traditional family values of work hard but have fun, and those were some of the early memories.
Well, and so what was school like for you? Kind of starting in grade school, did you play sports? Did you have a lot of friends? What was that like?
Yeah, early on, we'd moved a couple times within the city, and so changing schools a couple times. As a young child, not really a lot of sports, but once I get into about sixth grade, we had this consistency, and we're in that school for some time. And so yeah, I played basketball. Certainly not the star player, but I have many memories. I remember on the playground, for those that's it's a thing. You had I don't know if it's stickball. You had the long stick and a tennis ball. You throw against the school and you'd hit it. Of course, kickball was a big thing on the playground, and again, every kid had the bike, right, with the banana seat, and would go all over with those bicycles as a group. So even was the kid that my buddy next door, his sister was a little younger. She was willing to lay down as we put bricks, piece of wood on bricks, and did the Evel Knievel thing. Fortunately, she didn't get hurt. Later on, I broke my arm with such fun, but yeah, those were the memories outside with the kids in the neighborhood.
I when I think of the things we did with our bikes back then, I think parents today would have a heart attack if they saw their kids doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think, that trip to the emergency room in 1976, July 4th, because I remember it, because of that. But nonetheless, I think the emergency room wasn't really surprised. What happened to you? Well, I was riding my bike and I crashed. Oh, okay. Well, just wait over here. We'll get the x-rays. It was almost like, that's just the norm. But I kind of think those were the good old days, even with the risk involved, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, no question about that at all. And it's interesting that you got to spend our bicentennial Fourth of July celebration in the emergency room. So you really have a couple of memories there that you'll never forget.
Yeah, little did I know, but there's a nexus to my military service and Independence Day that I can share a little bit later too. It's just interesting, right? How these days kind of stick in your memory.
Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer that there aren't a lot of coincidences out there, and if you kind of pull everything together, you can see how things were happening. So, what about like middle school or junior high, and then into high school? What were those years like for you?
Yeah, so start working on with some responsibilities. I remember the deliver the paper days. Well, those were the days with you had your bicycle, you got your newspaper bag, you put the inserts in, especially Sunday morning. Heavy papers, you learn to fold them, throw them on the porches. So all that stuff some people see in black and white television. I lived that, and even to the extent where I thought, on the back of the magazines, like, yeah, you can sell these greeting cards for I think they're $5 a box, and they're personalized and you get $1 for every box, or you can pick one of your prizes. So again, at a young age, trying to think about what I can do, even at those young ages, do that. And as I got into high school, after the basketball in grade school, some of my buddies signed up for football. So what did I do? I signed up for freshman football, and that was a very rewarding experience because I was a third string lineman at 130 pounds. So basically just at practice, but getting on the bus and going to those games was again kind of that team concept, doing it together. I think that type of experience also led to interest in the military because there's a lot of overlap in sports and military service. So those were that was a good memory that year, even though again I wasn't a star athlete, but it was one of those things that you're doing something with others that's difficult, and not everybody does it.
Well, and I couldn't agree more that if you look at sports and you look at the military, they're very closely related. And I think especially football, any kind of a team sport where you have to rely on other people can really shape who we are. So I'm assuming you make it through high school, you graduate. What happens next?
Yeah, so I go up from the greeting card and the newspapers at age 15 to be a busboy and do that through high school, and then I start working at a hospital in the kitchen delivering trays, and again, something very routine, right? An entry level job for a kid in high school and even into college, but kind of exposes you to a whole new world, right? You're delivering trays to elderly people that aren't going to make it very much longer. You're getting on an L service elevator, and there's staff from the coroner's office, somebody who had passed. And so those reflection periods and something as interesting as that basically entry level job, I think is formative as well. And so somebody in my high school said, "Hey, let's go talk to the junior college rep." I took all the trades and technical in high school, right? The auto shop, the welding, the wood shop, the metal shop. That's what you did in Peoria, Illinois. You worked for Caterpillar or somebody who supports Caterpillar, right, in a factory. And I thought, all right, I'll sign up and we'll talk. Well, next thing you know, after high school, the next August, I was starting at a junior college, general courses, and did okay, C student, and took an introductory law enforcement class and liked it, and that led into my civilian career path down the road. So a couple years at junior college, and then transferred to a 4-year university in Western Illinois at Western Illinois University, and that's sort of where the military started because I discovered they had an ROTC program there.
So I'm assuming from that comment though that you joined the ROTC program then?
Absolutely. I had no prior service. It was 1986. They had a 2-year program. They had a scholarship opportunity if somebody was eligible. And I thought, working part-time at that hospital, and my family background wasn't going to be able to write a check for college back then. And so it's thought, well, hey, I can serve, I can go to college. They're going to actually pay me. And so it's a good combination. And along the way, as I transitioned there, I met my what would be future wife, girlfriend, and so we shared some of those experiences together from the very onset of that transition to a military lifestyle.
So let's talk about college a little bit and what ROTC was like and how that worked, because I don't know that a lot of our folks listening um, might not. I mean, we hear ROTC, but how did that work and what was that like for you?
Yeah, so as you know, Reserve Officer Training Corps, it's basically a commissioning, a pathway if somebody doesn't want to or chooses not to or enlist and go to basic training as an E1 entry level, then you can seek an opportunity to become a commissioned officer, which starts at a second lieutenant only if you have your college degree before then, and if you complete all the training, and then you go to your initial training after you get commissioned with all the active duty folks. And so it's a way for men and women to serve part-time with the full-time training requirements, and then as it's advertised often, just 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year. And so that was the pathway. So there were some barriers. I remember the very first introduction to the supply sergeant at the university's ROTC program, where my hair wasn't quite short enough. And he shared that with me, that there'd have to be some adjustments, right? So it was kind of a whole introduction with no prior service at all, but that was a pathway for folks to go. You would just have to go to an initial training your junior and senior year, and then after graduation, you go to your final phase, which most students that went through the 4-year program or had prior service would go through between their junior and senior. So there's a little extra, catching up to do. But it's a great pathway, and most of our commissioned officers, that's the pathway they take. Now there are some that get direct commissioned. There are some that have another pathway. I'll talk later about my youngest son who ended up going to West Point, which is another pathway. I tell him I went to Western, he went to West Point. We got the same commission. He was active duty, and I ended up active duty down the road. So that's just a little bit of background on that pathway.
So in ROTC, when you talk about initial training, is that like a basic training element? Is that, and how long is that?
Yeah, so the first summer is Fort Knox, Kentucky for me, and again everyone else with what they call advanced camp. Their only phase they have to go through after prior service. So the basic, drill sergeants, just like basic training, they're same drill sergeants that would be there for enlisted. Except for you're all cadets, right? You're all cadets that have to go through this training, very similar in some respects. The only difference I would say is they rotate you through consistent leadership positions to see how you handle stress, how you motivate others, your peers, and the next day they might be in charge, and you get evaluated in that capacity as well. So I found it very rewarding, very challenging, and I was committed after that I wanted to finish the program, because up to that point you don't have to contract. You can say thanks but no thanks. So but no, it was a good experience, and I value that experience to this day with the drill sergeants, because the other training is more with tactical officers, the second summer, if you will, or the one summer that those that have prior service go to, and that's really heavily weighed on leadership, but you don't have those drill sergeants, which I think is very important, developmental.
Yes, it can be scary, but also very important as you go through.
Yeah, looking back at the time, I think we always say whether you're enlisted or you go through that pathway as a ROTC, it's like, what did I get myself into? No turning back. You don't want to say I want to get back on the bus and go home. It's a little embarrassing. You just push through it. And at the end, for all the lack of sleep and fitness and fatigue, that graduation is an experience that very few people have experienced, but those that have will never forget.
Oh, it's very special. I think back to a time when I was in OCS. I was enlisted for most of my career, but there was a point in time where we were going through the chow line. It had been a really long day. We're going through the chow line, and you see all the people who had dropped out of the program were serving mashed potatoes and stuff to people. And there was just this half a second where I thought, I could serve mashed potatoes for the next 2 weeks and be home. But I decided not to. So I completely understand like that feeling of accomplishment. I think sometimes unless you've done it, it's really hard to explain to people so that they understand what that feels like.
I agree 100%. And veterans, we all have different pathways. We all overlap in some degree, no matter where we've been or what rank or what active duty or reserve, National Guard. We always have some things we can relate to, and it's one thing to explain it to those that haven't served, and that's great. I appreciate people, caring family members and friends, but I think you're right there. There's just no way to equate the experience through words alone. But nonetheless, I think most people realize that it's a very unique pathway for those that choose it, and it's not for everybody. And obviously, with about 6% of our nation being veterans and only 1% serving active duty at any one time, it is a very small percentage of a culture that people don't have to do it. Or at least they haven't had to do it in more than 20 years. No draft, obviously, and so it's those that choose to step up and say, "I'm going to do something difficult and hard," and not just because I'm going to get independently wealthy, but because I want to make a difference in the world. And I have the opportunity to do that, and I might do other things in the world, but I'm going to do this at this day at this time in terms of serving.
Well, excellent. Now, I do want to go back a little bit and talk about something that has nothing to do with the military when you were in college. Let's talk about how you met your wife.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. Again, this is after I got I worked at the hospital, but I also then started bussing tables. Did a little overlap, and in fact, I suggested that I was 16 when I may have only been 15 when I filled out that application. Just a typographical error. Anyway, there I was. Where are you going to go with that? I was just happy to have a job, right? And so I was in the back doing pots and pans and washing dishes and all that, and working hard. And my wife, soon my future wife, was up front where you would enter the restaurant, of course, the hostess desk, and all dressed up and smiling and so we kid around. My story is she kept coming back to the dish room. Why would she come back there, right? And her story is no, that I kept coming up to the hostess stand. But nonetheless, it worked out. It was a little touch and go with the first movie. One of the first movies we went to back then was Platoon. I was very
Oh,
interested in the military. It was out. It was a hit movie based on circumstances and combat in Vietnam. That it was a great special effect. My wife not so much.
how romantic, Bob. How romantic. Platoon.
I know. I had a lot to learn, and she thought she could help me with that, and so I didn't take her to movies like that after that, but certainly I continued on my military path, and only because of her was I able to be successful and have a what I consider a longer career than some.
So, did you remain dating throughout? Like, was there ever a point where you weren't together? I mean, this is a great story. Like, I don't want to let it go. So you take her to Platoon and she stays with you anyway. That's great news. Yeah, did you guys stay together the whole time?
We did. It was touch and go. That yeah, it was. I'm gonna say touch and go, but you're young and it had to have a little bit of evolution, But yeah, I got a second date and we continued to work there. And then she actually visited me at Western because obviously I had moved there. It's about an hour and a half from Peoria, and so she would come and visit. But one of the early memories with the military and Michelle, my wife, was that the spring every year they have a battalion ball, right? The equivalent of a military ball at some installations. And so all the cadets would be there in your uniforms, and your dates would be with you. And so May of 1987 was the first battalion ball that we went to. And it was just a great experience. And she was exposed, if you will, our guest speaker, all the dignitaries, all the pomp and circumstance, all the respect, and she was exposed to that really for the first time. And I think she enjoyed that experience, even though I was just a cadet, which was fine. Most of us were at that stage. But yeah, so I think that was a good introduction. Of course, we went the next year, senior year, and then subsequent to that, we went to many events throughout the career.
Well, excellent. So, did you and to kind of shift gears a little bit because I'm thinking of all the things we've already talked about. So,
Sure.
did you continue on with your education then in criminal justice, or what was your course of study then at Western Illinois?
Yeah, I got a 2-year degree at the junior college, and they called it police science then.
Yep.
And as part of that, I was of the internship between summers with the local police and sheriff's office, which was very valuable. Um, and then when I went to Western, I continued with that, minored in business management, and then they had a full semester internship, which got me back to Peoria for a whole semester, right, 3.5 months. 40 hours a week, and I was with the state's attorney's office, which is really very valuable. Reflecting back on it, sitting in on cases with the prosecutors, and interesting enough, one of those prosecutors ended up working for the same agency that I did as a civilian law enforcement career. And years later, actually in 2010, I saw him at West Point. Well, I wonder what he's doing there. His kid was in the same class that my youngest son was at West Point at 2010 for the whole welcome to the welcome to the academy type thing. So
Oh,
again, it's just strange things that happen that you get connected and then it resurfaces where these other connections come through. So yeah, so I completed the degree and there they call it Law Enforcement and Justice Administration.
okay. And what happens after college then? You've gone through the RTC program, so you got your commission. You're graduating college. What's the next step for you, Bob?
Yeah, so like many of us that get commissioned, which branch, right? And so I put in my request, aviation sounds pretty cool, right? And military police, maybe military intelligence. That's my list. So the Army says the Army's needs come first. Congratulations, your branch field artillery. Have they seen my math scores? I hope they have a calculator. Of course, you get there, they want you to do manual gunnery with your slide rules and manual gunneries on charts and darts, which was fine. It all worked out well. But looking back on it, Michelle, my wife, we were married by then. She did not like Fort Sill, a lot in Oklahoma. I thought it was great. You could sleep just off post in your apartment. You could hear the artillery rounds impact. I mean, that's like no better way to go to sleep, right? On Blockhouse Signal Mountain, on the range. But she not so much. She hadn't been away before. A lot of demands at that officer basic course, and I wanted to do well, so I spent a lot of time. And so it wasn't ideal, but I think the course was 5 or 6 months, and then we were able to go back to Peoria, which is where I got my first National Guard unit, and we sort of got settled in back in Peoria. And fortunately, the day I graduated from the basic course in Fort Sill, got done, got in the car, drove from Oklahoma to Illinois because the testing for the state police was that next morning. So, we got there like late at night, had to get up early and go to the testing. 1,000 people are taking this test. I thought, well, it's the window is open. I got to take it. So the transition was interesting. But it worked out fine. Several months later, they started a class and I was in it.
That's exciting stuff. One thing I learned in my military career, and it sounds like maybe you learned this too. If there's something you want to do in the military, you put the exact opposite on the list of things you want to do. And
Very true.
magically it happens, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And, like I said, and looking back, it worked out well. I'm so thankful for the experiences I got with that branch. But at the time, yeah, of course, then, we had the other cadets that prior service, some of them, they wanted to go infantry, and be a ranger and all that stuff. And I thought, okay, well, good for you. Combat arms for you. And then what do I get? Combat arms. But it's interesting because they refer, as you may know, the field artillery as the king of battle. The infantry, which a lot of hard chargers say, I want to lead troops in front line. That's fine. They're known as the queen of battle. And so, what does my son ask for when he gets commissioned? To be infantry. He got what he wanted. So the reverse didn't work for him. Maybe things have changed.
That could be. When we get done recording, I'll share with you my story because I was actually in the field artillery for a very short period of time. But that's a whole different story, and we want to talk about your story. But remind me when we're done because when we talk after this, I feel like somehow we were separated at birth.
Okay,
So
I'll be glad.
I'm just gonna say that. So let's talk about the State Police Academy and what was that like for you? And then let's talk a little bit about your career and family.
Yeah, yeah, it was great. Again, I had some experiences, obviously, with basic training and some overlap, and the state police, at least in Illinois, and many like Pennsylvania and Michigan, I think, and others are very paramilitary, both in their training as well as their uniforms, as well as their rank structure, and so it really melded together really good for me. I mean, we had the open bay bunks, bunk beds, is formations, very strict environment, which I really did well, and I was really encouraged. My direct supervisor, we had like 6 squads of 15 or whatever. He was a Vietnam veteran and Trooper Plow from the Chicago area, the Tollway, and just a old school guy, right? But when he heard I was in the Army, even though I was an officer, he was enlisted, so maybe rubbed a little way just for fun. But it was a great experience, and I did well, and I didn't get the district I wanted, like the Army. I wanted to go back to Peoria. Well, they said, "You send you to the next district next door, District 7, not 8." And of course, the farthest away in the Quad Cities on the Mississippi River, which worked out fine looking back on it. But yeah, I started my career. I started in '89 at the Academy, started on the road with my FTO in 1990, and just had a great career because my National Guard unit was in the Quad Cities, so it worked out really well. Rock Island Arsenal right next to it, a field artillery unit. So it really worked out well in terms of the overlap of those two careers early on. Of course, we would change from time to time over the career, but it was a great start, and it melded well.
And so, how did everything work through your military career and your time in the Guard, or your civilian career and your time in the Guard? Were there times where you were deployed, or was it really, the true, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks out of the year? How did that all kind of mesh together for you?
Yeah, so it was basically more than that, and I think as an officer, or even a senior NCO, you're going to have the additional training requirements, right? If you want to get promoted, opportunities. So that happened throughout the career. I volunteered for additional annual training. At that point we had a couple youngsters there, so additional AT was extra money, and I could just take my vacation time from the civilian employer and sort of bank that, and that's one way to to help out with the economic aspect of it with a young family. But I also, looking back, so I mentioned I got to the state police district in 1990 with my FTO. Well, in '92 we had the Great Flood of the Mississippi Great Flood, and so many units, including mine, was activated for that flood. And we had a small town. We were there, and so it was an opportunity for a young lieutenant to sort of be in charge. I worked 12 hours. My captain worked 12 hours. Had BBC was there interviewing us. We were living in the church basement. The church ladies were feeding us. I mean, it was just whatever it took to get things done, right? And so that was a great experience. And then in '93 we did a training deployment to Honduras in Central America. So a much different experience. For the first time, I was out of our country on foreign soil, and some aspects of that were a little bit tense, even though we didn't have an active conflict. Certainly, we had some troops that were engaged previous years, and some cautionary. The Honduran military escorted us with their gun trucks. So it was an opportunity to get out there and have that experience. And then in '97, I became a captain and battery commander for 3 years of artillery battery, which was a great experience to have that opportunity, one of the best ones I had. And then fast forward to '04, and that's when I deployed to Iraq for a year.
Okay, so a lot going on there. So let's hold that thought on the deployment to Iraq. I want to back up a little bit. You said you had a couple of kids, so let's talk about your children and when they were born.
Yeah, so my oldest was born in '88 in February, so February 3rd of '88, and my daughter a couple years later in August, and then my youngest son the same month as my oldest son, but February 1st. So I get the third and the first. They surround Groundhog Day. So yeah, so over the course of about 5.5 years, we had three little ones, which was, a challenge on a young family, doing the military thing part-time, state trooper, which means you have court, you're working second and third shift. Michelle was going back to school. And so we had a lot going on as a family at that time.
Sounds like a very busy house.
Yeah. We my wife was very efficient in managing, and we had, it's challenging, I think, for young adults when you're starting in any capacity, new careers, family. But I see it as sort of like the military. When you have challenging times, it can make you stronger, or weaken the bonds, and we were able to bond even closer to overcome some challenges that we had along the way.
Yeah, I used to work for a guy, Colonel Apodaca. He was my battalion commander when I was deployed. And one of the things he would say when something bad would happen is, this is a fork in the road here. You can go one way and use this to strengthen you, or you can go the other way and let this be a reason why you don't want to be here anymore, right? Or, weaken you. And so it was a great lesson. And so absolutely, the challenges that families face can either strengthen them or not. Fortunately, you took your wife to see Platoon early on, so she knew what to expect, right?
Yeah, kind of, sort of, yeah. But I think that was her vision. Is like when you deploy, this is your day-to-day activity, and so I had to backtrack a little bit, say, well, it is Hollywood, and some of those things did happen, but it wasn't like 24/7 nonstop. So she kind of got acclimated, and there's lot of overlap with public safety, especially policing. I mean, when you put the uniform on, put the ballistic vest on every night to go to work third shift, there's not any guarantees. And over that career, unfortunately, there are funerals that I had attended, and she knew that those things. So I think in a way, it almost prepared her for the risks that are associated with particularly with deployments. Obviously, even training is as risk involved, but and I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just a reality without being too extreme about thinking something's going to happen every day. But at some point, whether it's your first day or last day in service, there's a risk factor.
Right. And so how were your children through this period, kind of leading up to your deployment, but how did your kids handle that on the times where you had to be gone? So we think about the flood and other things. And I know they were pretty young at the time, but how do you think that influenced your relationship with them?
Yeah, it was important, but all they knew their whole lives was me in the military, right? And for the most part, me in policing. So they saw me in uniform almost every day, whether it was weekend, annual training, or whether it was just the regular job. So it was just normal for them, like somebody would be normal if they went to work in some other capacity. So it wasn't out of the ordinary. Now, sometimes if there was an event, they were at a game or something, and I was in the area and I was able to stop by. Well, other friends are like, "Oh no, the police are here." For them, it's no, it's just dad. No one's in trouble. It's okay. And and come and give me a hug. So it's interesting, not so much how they reacted, but how other people would react again, just because of what I'm wearing, right? And it's the same thing in our military uniforms that people would react different in a restaurant than if we were dressed the way we are now. So it's just interesting. But yeah, I think they adjusted well because again, it's all they knew. Now the deployment's a little bit different story because when you're gone for a year, that's a little bit different than dad will be back in a couple of weeks.
Right. And it's a different mission than the things you've done. So before we get to that, let's talk a little bit more about the kids. What are they doing today? I know you alluded to one of your sons went to West Point. We can kind of talk through the kids now, or do you want to wait till later on in the conversation?
No, that works fine. So my oldest one, he went to Florida about 10 years ago. He had worked in telecommunications locally in our local community that we ended up in before I retired, as I transferred around the state at different opportunities presented themselves. And so we were in that last community for about 10 years. So most of their schooling, K-12 schooling was there. And so my oldest one, he went to a junior college right there locally. And after that, he went to the same university I went to. It was local. We ended up there, and then after that, he worked a couple years in the cell phone industry, entry level, and then he got to be the manager, and then he had an opportunity in Florida, and he's been there now for I think 10 years. He's got two little girls, our granddaughters that we'll be seeing next week, and so we're excited about that. 2.5 and about 4 months. So he's doing great down there. His wife's from Florida. He met her when he moved down there, and so they've been married for about 5 years. So doing great. I just spent a weekend with him and my other son up in Cleveland watching the Browns and Bears, and up in the upper Midwest. I saw snow flurries and everything up there because we moved to Tennessee and
Oh
retired
yeah.
there. So I've got my son and my oldest son in South Florida, and my daughter is in South Carolina. She got
Uh-huh.
married about 3 years ago. She went to University of Illinois in Springfield, which was where I last went to get my last degree, and kind of followed her footsteps, I guess you could say. And she's doing great, and her husband are in South Carolina, so a little closer to us. And then our youngest son, who at high school, 18, went to West Point. We had the whole 30 seconds to say goodbye type thing, which was, developmental for him. Michelle was a little bit sensitive about it. He got off, he graduated in 14 and served his 6 years, was in Syria and Afghanistan. So Michelle not only had to deal with me in Iraq for a year, but now your youngest son is in, harm's way, we'll say. But he took a different path, infantry, and he was with the Ranger Regiment, which is a tough unit to get into, and combat diver and airborne aerosol, all that stuff that I didn't do. But good for him. And then he got out and he started a business. And last year he started working on his master's in business at Harvard, and he graduates in May. So we'll be headed out to Cambridge in May to see him graduate. And he got married this last summer. So all kids are married, and we got two grandkids, and they're all spread apart from the Northeast to South Florida to South Carolina. So that's the update on the kids.
Wow. So if you want to travel, you got places to go, and it sounds like they're all very successful. And not to put too fine a point on it, but being appointed to West Point's no small thing. That's a huge process. I know my nephew went to the Air Force Academy, and I got to watch that unfold. And wow, so congratulations on all the kids. That's incredible. Not that they
Yeah,
weren't challenging at points, I'm sure.
yeah. Well, my daughter and my oldest son have their master's degree. He went back to school last year, my oldest, and got it with his little one at home. So sort of what Michelle did and what I did later. So Brian is dragging up. He's the young one. He's finally getting his master's degree. I guess it's Harvard, so that's okay. But anyway, yeah, we're proud of them, and the life they lead and the service they do for organizations where they're at. And so yeah, so we're in a good place.
Well, that's great. So then let's go back to the point where we stopped. And 2004, you're chugging along. You're doing your thing in the National Guard. You're in the state police. I got to ask a question. Illinois State Police, are they troopers? Are they called state
Yes.
troopers? Okay.
Mhm.
Because some places, I know, like Las Vegas, or not Las Vegas, but Nevada, they have the highway patrol, which is not thought highly of. Like in Michigan and Illinois and some other states, the highway patrol, the state police are a premier group. Some states they are not. So I was just curious how that worked in Illinois.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people don't even think about that, but there's like the Florida Highway Patrol, right? They're just on the interstate, point A to point B. Now, if there was something crazy, they could, get off the exit, right? But
Right.
and it's a much more narrow mission. Missouri Highway Patrol, for example, but the state police has full police powers. What that means is they have an investigative component, forensics lab component. In fact, Illinois has the third largest lab system in the world, not United States, but the world. Of course, they incorporated Chicago's labs years ago, and they were the first state police agency to be accredited, which is a challenging for a large agency to accomplish, jump through the hoops to be accredited with your policies and procedures and training. So, I'm encouraged by that. And again, it's a different issue, but certainly law enforcement in general faces a lot of challenges now, which affects recruiting, which kind of overlaps in the military. But I'm very happy to have the opportunity to serve with that. It gave me opportunities that I wouldn't have with a highway patrol of just patrolling. I had opportunities and assignments in other areas that really made me more aware and a broader understanding of our communities that we serve.
Yes. So let's talk about leading up to your 2004 deployment. So let's just kind of dig into it. What happened?
Yeah, so in 1997, I went to Poland. Illinois has a partnership with Poland. Every state in our nation has a partnership with another nation, and that's to build bridges, if you will. And the National Guard is uniquely positioned to do that because they have a state mission, and they also have the opportunity and maybe some flexibility to do training partnerships where the soldiers and sailors and Air Force personnel are able to come to our country and vice versa. And so ours is Poland. One of the reasons is because Warsaw, Poland has a very large population of Polish. Right? Obviously, it's their capital city, but the second city in this world with the next largest population of Polish is Chicago. So it's a natural connection there. And so I had an opportunity in '97 to go there, and it was a great experience. And they'd been out of the Warsaw Pact for about 10 years then. So ever since our partnership continued, and over 30 years now of back and forth. And it was interesting because we had countries from, I don't know, 20 different countries there. And we did a computer-based exercise in the military base at Drosko Pomorsky. And so it was a great experience. Some of those countries I later served with in 2004 that were Lithuanians and some other countries. And it was just a very interesting because I had never been out of the country other than the Honduras training. So that led to the partnership. And in 2001, we remember 9/11, of course, and it was a motivator for a lot of people to volunteer to serve. We never want that to happen again. And so I remember that very detailed where I was at state police headquarters. I was taking an exam for a promotional opportunity, and it resonated with me. So 15 years into the National Guard here, I had an opportunity. Illinois was sending 10 to 11 person teams to Iraq to be attached to the Polish division as a liaison because we had this partnership. And they had the first team was about to be done in a few months, and they were looking for the second team. They're looking for volunteers. And so I write in my book. I wrote about my year in Iraq just this year. I released it because it was so impactful, and I kept a journal because you don't know what you don't know in terms of whether you're going to come back. And I read in there about the family meeting where we got together because my unit didn't get deployed. They need 11 officers around the state to fill these slots to replace the other team. We're looking for volunteers. Well, if you're a volunteer, you better be ready if they say we accept and not surprise your family. So we took a family vote, and I write about that, how that won. It was 3-2. I often wonder what if it was 3-2 the other way. Would I say, okay, you guys win? Because I really wanted to go. It's been 15 years. I'm 39 years old. I've seen these other folks come and go. Is now or never. And so I got selected among 11 altogether, and we left on. Well, we went to Fort Bliss to do our training, and we're scheduled to leave on July 4th, Independence Day of 2004.
Wow. So at all time, we go all the way back to your emergency room visit in 76.
Yeah, stressful moment.
Yes. Yeah. And so what was that like for you to, for me, I stepped on a bus and then I went somewhere and then I got on a plane. So what was it like to kind of leave the family and step away?
Yeah, well, it was emotional, but we had several months to anticipate it, right? And so I reflect and write about that. Like you almost value those sporting events with the kids, right? The time together that maybe you would take for granted because you know the clock is ticking, and at some point you're going to get on that bus and get on that plane and be back in a year, hopefully, if everything goes well. And so yeah, those were and I write about looking back on it, the kids' reactions were a little bit different too, right? One was a little more clingy, one was a little more distant. One was a little bit more bossy, we'll say. It was just their own way of dealing with the inevitable that we've got a calendar on the date when you're leaving. And Michelle, she's going to be a single parent for at least a year and had never been a single parent. I don't know if I could handle it. Maybe the Iraq deployment was the easy pathway. But nonetheless, it was challenging. And no matter where you go or for how long or what the circumstances are, being away from your kids and your wife is difficult. I remember when I first joined ROTC thinking, how did these Vietnam veterans, how are they gone for a year? And then they just get back and go back to normal? I just couldn't comprehend that. And here I was about to experience that.
Yeah. And so what was your deployment like? What did you do? Where were you at? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so we're in Babel province, which is the ancient grounds and ruins of Babylon, stated many, many times in the Bible and historical significance. And that was one of the issues about, maintaining that. I know Colonel and I had a meeting with the Minister of Cultural there to make sure that, those grounds were maintained. And it was very interesting where we were. Of course, we had 20 nations with us. Not all 20 in that base, but certainly probably 6 or 8 at that base. And then in the area of operations in the nation, of course, all 20 were there. So that was very interesting. Certainly, we did some more training in Kuwait before we went north into Iraq. The heat, the temperature. At Fort Bliss, it was hot in the summer, right, in July. But Kuwait was a little bit warmer. And so that takes some acclimation. And then the team that we replaced, they were good, but they wanted to get home. They've been there a year, so we did a pretty quick, relief in place and transfer authority of our team. And I was kind of the admin guy for our colonel. Was my internal job, but I was actually the division detainee officer, meaning whether it was Marines or coalition forces or a special force element. All the detainees had to be tracked, obviously, and that was just after Abu Ghraib, so a lot of attention was on that. And not only that, but they had to be transported from all these areas to Abu Ghraib was the primary in the north central area where they were detained. And the flip side that a lot of people don't realize is once detainees were taken there and there was assessment on the evidence presented, and Sometimes they were released because, one case, somebody's taking photos, but they were taking photos of the sunset, not the military base to the right. They didn't know until they sorted that out. And so I would be training Ukrainian detainee officers, Polish detainee officers, and others to make sure that the procedures were followed, as well as the tracking mechanisms, which was critical. So I did about 140 convoys, mostly up to Baghdad and back, which was, something different, for a major at that time to be doing convoys back and forth. But again, you wanted to lead by example, and you wanted to, especially with these coalition nations, the U.S. is leading. We need to be there in the seat doing the leading, not just say, let me know when you get back. So it was kind of unique. And I think it was my state police background that said, hey, you're going to work a good fit for you in this detainee operations. And it really was. There was a lot of overlap working with the Iraqi police and others.
Well, and not to mention the interpersonal communication skills you learn as a police officer, the ability to de-escalate things. I can see where that all really kind of wraps in together. Are there any moments that stick out in your mind during your deployment? Some things maybe you'd like to talk about that happened while you were there?
Yeah, there were some, and again, I think it was almost therapeutic for me to write about some of these things because even along the way, as I was there, I'm not a big journal guy, never journal in my life, but again, it was so important to sort of capture it. I was concerned that I wouldn't remember it all. Which when I look back 20 years later to do this book, I was like, oh, okay, I'd almost forgotten about that. But 12 days on the ground, and really had the first experience with death. A Marine pilot flew into our base with some folks that they're there for a coordination meeting. Nice guy, talked to him, chatted just a bit. He had just gotten in country recently. And later that day, our intel guys tell us that, at that base he was at, that there was a death of that pilot. It was a non-hostile gunfire. And to this day, I don't know the circumstances exactly to that, but I did go back later and find it. At the time, he had a 2-year-old son. He was from California, and just tragic. You just think about it from one moment of laughing and shaking hands to several hours later. And so it was a sense of real. We had memorial services, for folks, but nobody that I knew that personally that from that area up to that point. And it was like, wow, 12 days in. And so that was impactful. And then, that's one thing, but a month or so into it, we had a mortar attack, first mortar attack in daytime on that base. And again, people got injured, some civilians, and some soldiers from other nations. And again, but for me walking from point A to B, I could have been there, right? In that moment, in those seconds. And so again, another example of realization of the risk. And then we're driving SUVs up to Baghdad, soft skin vehicles, had the stereo going. And went through a few bullet holes, not in that vehicle, but others that were on convoys. We decided to take Humvees. Right? The guidance changed, and again, soft skinned Humvees, and then the whole thing, as we know, that welding on the side, and then we got up armor Humvees eventually. But probably the most impactful that I write about and that I recall, we had about 3 IED incidents. One of them, the worst one, was where the vehicle in front of me, 3 vehicle convoy, was headed back from Baghdad, and IED detonated a little bit in front of it, so there's no shrapnel, but the reaction of the driver, who was a friend of mine, to swerve to avoid the blast, resulted in it turning upside down. My other buddy was in a turret. So again, in that instant, I'd seen so many fatal crashes in my years as a state trooper. I just knew that the way that was, the wheel was still turning, the machine gun was smashed, diesel fuel was leaking out, that there's no way from the turret he's going to survive. Well, he had dropped down at the right time, dislocated his shoulder. My buddy, the driver, had some, some internal things, but called in a medevac, which, as a cadet, ROTC or OCS, you just a basic task, right? Calling the medevac 9 line. And we had always had it ready right there just so you could go line by line. And little did I realize that day that I'd be doing that, not knowing the condition. So they survived. Purple Heart, not one of those things you want to get, but you want to be able to go home, and they eventually did with all of us together. So those are some of the highlights, and there's other things that happened, but those are the ones that sort of resonate. And the other thing about the Humvee IED incident was I knew that as soon as my buddy got to Baghdad, to the hospital, he'd be calling home as soon as they let him. And once one wife knows, or spouse, they're all going to know, right? And so that's the other thing that when those things happen, that you know, the worst thing is being home and not knowing. And I had that experience as a dad when my son was deployed. You don't know what's going on, and I sensed that that's so much worse. But all in all, that was good. We were scheduled to leave in 2005, a year later on July 4th, 2005, Independence Day. And as those that deployed know, that's a very unique feeling when you're wheels up and headed back to the U.S.
Yeah, there's two special feelings that unless you experience it, it's hard to explain. One is stepping off the plane onto the field of battle, and the next one is stepping back onto the plane and off the field of battle. Those are two feelings that even talking about them now gives me pause. So I can understand that. And what was it like coming home?
Let's take a quick break.
Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on donations from our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and would like to support our continued efforts, please go to www.veteransarchives.org and select the donate button. Thank you.
It was a great feeling. Now, there are 11 of us. Ideally, you all get on the plane together, right? Well,
Right.
there's the new colonel. We had a '06 in charge of our group. So the new colonel, the old colonel had to collaborate a little bit, and they had to go up to Baghdad for one more trip to introductions with the senior command up at Corps headquarters, and that was fine. So I stayed back with the colonel, and we were going to be the last two to go. So it was a little bit eerie to see your buddies fly over the wall in their helicopter going to Kuwait, and you would follow on. It's like you're so close, right? I'm not going to say jealous, but just it'd be so nice to be together.
Right.
That worked out. They got to Kuwait cleared. We met up with them in Bliss, and then I they had one seat for me and the colonel, and of course the colonel told me to go the next 2 days or whatever, and so he followed on, and we all met up at Fort Bliss for the finish up there. But it was a good feeling. Unfortunately, we weren't at Fort Bliss that long. They knew the troops getting back there wanted to get home, and but yeah, it was a great feeling to get home and know that I was home for good, and yeah, a lot of memories. I'll just share one more quick thing about that. My kids were 12, 14, and 16, tough ages anyway for teen,
Right.
preteen, right? And I just share this. My oldest son and I write this book, and he knows he was having some challenges after I left. And my wife was, what am I going to do? I got three kids, and I don't know what's wrong with him. Well, she took him to get some counseling and said, I don't know. And what they found out was somebody meaning well told him at 16 that your dad's going to be gone, so you're the man of the house. And he didn't know what that meant at 16, right? He just had his driver's
Right.
license. I mean, what's he supposed to do, right? I mean, if somebody, a criminal shows up, he's supposed to take him on. I mean, what does that mean, right? He's supposed to get another job or something. So anyway, when they talked through that, it was fine. But I just mentioned that because, since 9/11, more than 2 million kids have had at least one parent deployed overseas. That's 2 million kids that had that experience. We talk about our experience, but what about the kid that's 12 or 2 or 6 or 19, and it affects them too. And again, in the National Guard it's different because you don't have the whole division moving out from Fort Campbell, right? It's like, no, we're the only people in town. There's somebody in Springfield, somebody in Chicago that left with it. It's not like even a National Guard unit. You can go and say, hey, let's just hang out, spouses and kids, and get together. So it's unique because there's some advantages, but there's some disadvantages too when you don't have that connectivity with the military base active duty component that you're just kind of on your own. So what do they say to my wife when she's out in the store? Hey, did you see what happened on the news? It's like,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
I don't want to see what's happening on the news, right? It's not good things that you see on the news. But
No, if it makes the news, you probably definitely don't want to see it. And I understand what you're talking about. I deployed '06, '07, and I came home, and then my wife and my son both deployed right after that.
wow,
And
wow.
so my kids, I got to see it from both sides, and my kids got to kind of see it in a different light, and it really shaped how they do things and who they are today. So you're absolutely right. And And, Bob, you reference your book. I want to make sure people hear this. It's Citizen Soldier by, is it Robert or Bob Elliott on the?
It's under Robert Elliott, and the subtitle, because there's some versions of Citizen Soldier, from the land of Lincoln to Iraq and back, is the subtitle, and published by New Degree Press. And I'm not trying to sell books. I give a lot of books away to veteran organizations. So if there's somebody that says, hey, could we have a signed book for whatever organization, I'd love to send it out. But it's been a pathway for me to connect with other veterans of different eras, of different experiences, and their family members. And to me, people I never would have met otherwise. And so it really is serving a multiple purpose. And also my granddaughter was born, and I knew I wanted to have something more than a journal that she didn't care about, some type, because we all know the folks that say, well, my grandparents served, I think in World War II, or I think over here. And it's like, it's not about me. It's as much about family and some of the things we've been talking about those emotional roller coasters, whether you're deployed, whether you're in training, that you experience. So hopefully it'll be able to connect with people, because as veterans, we don't really share a lot anyway, especially our older veterans. And I think it's important to share. You don't have to write a book, but whether it's another veteran, a family member, have a conversation, somebody you can go to. And I'll say this, and I really want to get this out. One of the things that I'm very aware of, and I think we all are, I don't know about all your listeners, is that since 9/11, we lost 7,000 military personnel to combat operations, which is 7,000 funerals. Is just terrible, right? Over more than 20 years. But in the same time frame, those that have served since 9/11, either veterans or currently serving, 30,000 suicides. Those are funerals too. Those are families getting notified. Those are shock to families and friends. And so we really need to think about, somebody gets in a place where it's such a dark place that that's their only pathway out. And I'm really happy that, the 1-800 crisis line has changed to 988. And I read about that early on in the book, because we need to know that number, not because you or I need it, we might, but because we might know somebody that we can share it with, that say, hey, if it's 2 a.m, your buddy, you're texting them and they can't get back to you or whatever, call 988, press 1, and there'll be somebody there to chat with you about whatever. It doesn't have to be suicidal. You could just say, you know what, I'm stressed out, I lost my job, or I had a relationship issue, or I just don't know what to do at work. It's like, there's a pathway. And so that's another way that I share. The book is just a pathway to have a conversation about that. I was at Fort Campbell. I'm not saying it's a great base, but there are young soldiers there that didn't know what I was talking about when I said 988. And they got posters everywhere, right? They're trying to get the word out, because it's one of those things that, like 911, unless you need it, you don't really care about it. But when you need 911, you dial it. And so the same thing with 988. So I just wanted to get that in there as well.
Well, and I want to go back on what you said. I don't think it's about selling books at all. I think that for a lot of veterans, and I can only speak for myself, but I know a lot of veterans, of course, they feel like they're the only ones that feel how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. And when we share our stories, like through Veterans Archives or through your book, someone could pick up your book and they can read it and they can say, oh, I guess I'm not the only person that's ever gone through this, or I'm not the only person that's ever felt a certain way. And to some extent, that can be healing and helpful to those folks. So that's why I mentioned your book here, is because I think it's beneficial. Someone could pick that book up and it could change their life.
Yeah, and the other target audience really, Bill, is the 94% that haven't served, right?
Right.
Because where do they get their information about us veterans? They get it from a video game, a certain segment of our population. They get it from a newscast, which is usually not good news, right? If they're talking about something that happened in the military, very few would subscribe to a military journal or Stars and Stripes and or go to the blog or podcast if they're not military. And so they have assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions aren't valid. And I will just give you a quick example. Some people look at the military and they think, oh, stay away, PTSD, unstable, mental issues, right? And others look at the military and say rigid, structured, not very flexible. And I know employers are, veteran friendly, and they see the advantages that we bring to the table generally. But just like any other entity, you look at clergy, business, military, we're not all the same. We have, there's a continuum, maybe the one extreme where, we've got some people that have served that maybe shouldn't have. on the other one, that people that are just, the most esteemed and respectful individuals at the highest levels and serve our nation. So, these assumptions and misunderstandings can be clarified through, veteran archives, through podcasts, through books. And I see the authenticity comes when it comes from people that have lived it, not just that I've done research and I'm a researcher. I've done research and this is what it shows that, 32% whatever. Let's get to the really experiences that people have, because again, they overlap across veterans, and not the exact, but they do overlap, and especially those about the emotions, about the family, about the connections, about the challenges. And those are the things that I think are important to share, that it's not a perfect world in the military nor anywhere, but we're better off by far more often than not for having served or having family members serve. And that's my belief, and some may disagree.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't disagree with you. I think you're exactly right. And so let's talk about that. You leave Iraq, you come home. I'm assuming at some point you go back to work. You get back kind of into the family groove. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll just comment to another issue that evolved. When I got back, my wife noticed, I didn't notice, I had a couple of weeks off work and chance to kind of reconnect and things. But the kids were coming to her, 12, 14, and 16. Hey, mom, can I go to, Susie's house? Hey, mom, can I go here? Can I do that? And she's like, your dad's here. Not that they didn't care, but after a year of repetitive, she was it, not that they were fishing for answers. They should have thought about that and said, hey, if mom says no, go to dad, right? He's
Right.
back home. But it was just a little example that she became aware of that I didn't even notice. And they didn't notice either. So it was one of those things where when you come back, you don't flip a switch and everything back to normal, right? There's just no way. You can have the best experience. The kids had the best experience with, and they're happy to get together. But again, an adjustment period, I'll say. And I think there's also a little bit of trust, like, is he going to go again? Because that time I had 16 years and I had four more. I was going to do 4 more years and be done at 20. And so, although I didn't get deployed again, I felt, I did my job. Now I'm 40, 41 years old. They probably want to take somebody that's 20, 21 for some of those missions, but it worked out well. But yeah, I got back home, finished the 20 with the military, retired, 08, 88 to 08. And then the state police, I had another 7 years to go to finish up there, and I retired from there in 2015. And I'll just add one more little thing. What I chose to do, when I retired, I'd applied early and wanted to go back to school, not because I had GI benefits, but it's an example that I think our veterans and their family members now underutilize that benefit that they've earned. And so I started 2 weeks after I retired in 2015 with a doctorate program at University of Illinois in Springfield, where my daughter had graduated with her master's, and spent about 4.5 years in that program to accomplish that goal. And so I get back to the research. I do believe research is important, but there's a balance. You've got the quantitative numbers in the surveys and research, and then you've got the qualitative. Like this book is really qualitative about people, conversations, experiences. But again, I use the GI Bill benefits for that. It wasn't restricted, and why not? I'm eager. I taught part-time at a university for 17 years. And after retirement, I taught full-time a couple more years. So, I see the value of education. My kids see the value of education, and, both formal and informal. Training from the military is a form of education, of course. And so again, that was my message, is to, always learn. Whether you're in the military or out, you have opportunities to learn from others and to develop your skill sets. And so that was my intent. And then after that, we moved to Tennessee after my wife retired about 5 years ago, and have been down here doing volunteer work. She does some contract work, and just enjoying the mild winters.
Yeah. I was going to say, why Tennessee? I get the mild winters, but I mean, is there some connection to Tennessee, or you just thought, hey, this would be a great place to live?
Yeah, no, we leading up to retirement, we traveled to a number of places, saw places like North Carolina and Florida, and we knew we wanted to get out of the snow belt. There's no question about that. And for that reason. But this is centrally located. We're close to the international airport in Knoxville, and again, my daughter's in South Carolina, Boston, Florida. great central location, not far from Illinois to family and friends. So yeah, there's a lot to like here, the natural beauty, and so it's a good fit for us for the retirement, slowing down but having enough amenities available with very little, traffic jams and very little pollution and the great outdoors without being too far removed from family and friends.
Oh, well, and you can't ask for much more than that. So, well, good. So, so writing the book? This really interests me, and I'm sure that anyone listening to this will be interested too. I understand why you wrote the book, but how did you get from the idea to actually publishing a book? Lots of people would like to do that, but very few actually do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very, very few do because it's hard. Not that I'm extra smart about writing a book, but I needed guidance and direction, just like when we have that military professional development opportunities, right, where somebody teaches us something, and I knew I wanted to do it, and I had the journal, so I dusted it off and I started looking, and it was a Marine that I haven't met in person yet, but Naval Academy graduate that I saw on a podcast, I think, and he was talking about what he was doing, I think in Philadelphia, boxing nonprofit to help inner city kids. Anyway, very well spoken, and he talked about New Degree Press, which was where he was publishing his book with. So I reached out and contacted the organization. A professor at Georgetown developed this for his students, where you can write a manuscript in one semester, and if you want to go on and publish it, you can. So they had a program that was going on at the time where they were taking people outside of the university, not just students. And so I looked into it, had a conversation with them, and thought, this is a pathway because I need some help. I need some mentoring along the way. So you have the Zoom meetings once a week. You have developmental editor that you meet with and send your content. You have these revision editors, and then the final editor. So it's a whole process, about a year-long process that was, reasonably priced, if you will, and it's a hybrid. So it's not like they're writing you a check and in advance on it. Not to that level. You got to either have a reputation or be somebody, a professional athlete, or somebody to get those people to write you checks to do that. But my purpose was never to make a lot of money. It was to invest. And then the whole concept is you get some people that are interested, that they pre-order the book, and then that helps offset some of the cost. And then they're the ones that get it first. And so that pathway worked really good for me because, again, I got mentored along the way. Everything with cover art to the layout and things of that nature. So it was a really good pathway, and I found it because of another veteran.
Wow. And so veterans helping veterans all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just point out one thing, Bill, because I think it's really unique, and maybe a lot of people have seen it. But one of the things I did in Iraq was I had a digital camera, which is kind of fancy for '04, right? And I took some short videos, helicopter over the terrain, Humvee, convoys, message home to my wife and kids. And so I had these. They served their purpose, but I still had them. And I think my wife saw a book with a song in it. So I downloaded those videos to YouTube, and then I created QR codes for each of those short videos. And so what that does, especially for the non-veteran, is it takes them to the time and place, nothing graphic, of 2004. We have got these, civilians around. You're going on this highway in this Humvee, or you're flying over the desert in a Polish helicopter. And it brings them just for 10 or 20 seconds to a place where they can have an understanding in their mind's eye of the environment, the sounds of it, and experience that before they delve into the additional pages later. So I think that's another way to connect with. Again, veterans would be able to connect with some of that, regardless of where they served or when. The sound of a helicopter, the sound of a Humvee. But the non-veterans maybe will get a better sense of how barren some of those areas are, or how condensed some of the cities are that we operated in.
Well, and I think that's a great idea. I mean, everyone that I either deployed with or know that has deployed has a treasure trove of video and of just still photography that I think someday would make a nice compilation to let people really know what it was like to be there, even up through leaving and coming home. There's a lot of great stuff. So I think it's a great idea to put that as part of the book. So we've really talked about everything. We talked about your entire life, your retirement, you're living nicely down in Tennessee. It sounds like it's beautiful there. Before we wrap anything up, though, is there anything we haven't covered, anything we've missed that you would like to cover?
really we hit all the areas. I did make a note here though, if there's sort of a last comment that I think was important. And I just want to, and really the service in Iraq was really, even though it was later in my career, was really the most impactful, I'll say, both military service and family. But what that provided me was a perspective that few people understand. And I think we've talked about that early on. But you think about the risk associated, those days of sadness, but yet the accomplishments, right? That emotional roller coaster goes up and down, right? You've things that happen just day in and day out. So there's this mix of emotions, but none stronger than that intense will to protect the soldiers to your right and left. Doesn't matter if they're from another country. It doesn't matter if they're from another unit. If obviously if they're on your team, that you it's just you. Doesn't matter what people say back home, what the newspapers read. It's like at that moment in that Humvee, that helicopter, in that area you're at, it's you. And there's no. I can't think of another, even in policing, because you have others close by. Typically, even if you're 30 minutes of backup away, it's different than if you're on main supply route Tampa, 30 miles south of Baghdad. Yeah, you can call in for help and it probably will get there pretty quick, but there's no guarantees. You're on your own until then, right? And in 2 minutes or 20 seconds can be a long time, but you get that sense of that bond, even if they're Marines or Air Force, didn't have interaction with Coast Guard or Navy EOD folks that were there. You're calling up to an aircraft overhead for that medevac, and then the pilot pops up. So you have a new appreciation for each other's, and not only is that and so intense, I think, with taking care of each other, but when you return home after the mission is complete, just that emotional experience of not having been home for so long, and then I think we all have these if only I can get home, we're going to do this and the other. And I took each of my kids on a one-on-one trip because I thought it was important, as far as that getting reacquainted, to have that one-on-one time. And so they got to pick a place, and me and each of them went somewhere. Of course, we went places as a family, but it's hard to describe, as and other veterans probably know, that emotion. You just don't want to take that for granted anymore, right? Even years later, you don't want to take it for granted and say, yeah, I did my thing and that was fine. And you really want to remember what it was like not being together, because that's what makes it so important and makes the bond so strong, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. We the whole time we're there, we want to get home and forget about it. But yeah, it's understanding those feelings that make us appreciate the people around us. And so normally I would ask, hey, do you have a final thought? But I think that's your final thought. So I think we're good there.
Yeah.
So Bob, I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing to participate in Veterans Archives. I think that your story will touch people and give people some insight into the life of a veteran, not just your military service, but your whole life.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. At Veteran Archives, I'm glad I came across it. And, I think it's so important what you're doing, because there's stories that need to be told. Again, not everybody's going to write a book or go down a more complicated process. This is very straightforward, very simple, very easy to do. You're easy to talk with. And it's so important, whether they share a little bit or they share more, just to share it, not just for our interest or your viewers' interest, but historically, right? This is something that they'll be able to hand down to their family. And even though the grandkids may not be able to understand it, someday they'll be able to not only read, a story that, if somebody had a journal they left, but most of us don't, but they will have this memory, right? That they can just plug in and play, and not just read it, but hear it, and from the veteran, through your assistance, see and hear the veteran. And that's going to leave a legacy for families.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Veterans Archives, the podcast that brings you the story of the men and women who have created and lived our military history. If you or someone you know served in the military and would like to share your story with Veterans Archives, please go to www.veteransarchives.org, select the Apply Now button, and fill out our application, and someone will get right back with you. Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on the donations of our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and you support our efforts, please go to www www.veteransarchives.org and select the Donate button. Any donation is certainly appreciated. Look for Veterans Archives on your favorite social media. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Just look for Veterans Archives. Like, follow, and share our page. We'd certainly appreciate it. If you or someone you know is a veteran and you are struggling with mental health issues, please dial 988 and select option 1 for the Veterans Crisis Hotline. Please be sure to tune in next time for the next episode of Veterans Archives.